We are talking today with Sam Quinones. Sam Quinones is a Los Angeles-based freelance journalist, author, and storyteller. In 2004, after 10 years living and writing in Mexico, where he produced his first two books, he returned to Los Angeles to write for the LA Times, covering immigration, drug trafficking, and gangs. In 2014, he resigned from the paper to return to freelancing, working for National Geographic, Pacific Standard Magazine, the New York Times, and other publications. He is the author of True Tales from Another Mexico, The Lynch Mob, The Popsicle Kings, Chileno, and The Bronx. Antonio's Gun and Delfino's Dream, True Tales of Mexican Migration. And he is here to talk about his new book, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. Sam, thank you very much for coming and spending time with us today.
Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So what was your motivation in writing Dreamland?
Well, it really grew out of a story that I discovered while I was at the LA Times, finding this story about this small town in Mexico where everybody in this town came to the United States, all the men came to the United States to work in a system, a kind of a franchise system for selling heroin retail, like pizza. It was the most bizarre story I'd stumbled on in quite some time at that point. This town had developed a system for selling heroin as if it were pizza. You the addict, call a number in your town, Seattle, Portland, Reno, Salt Lake, all across the country. And the operator then takes your order and on another phone dispatches a driver who is constantly circulating with his mouth filled with little balloons of tenth of a gram doses of heroin, telling the driver where to meet the addict who's just put in his order. Normally it's at a parking lot of like a convenience store or a fast food joint or a strip mall of some kind, Burger King or something. And the addict will go there, the driver will go there. They'll meet. The driver will literally spit out the 5, let's say, balloons of heroin into his hand. Boom, hand it to the guy, and the addict pays whatever amount of money it is, and the deal is done. This system, for a variety of reasons we could talk about, exploded. It just grew from the San Fernando Valley, where it first started, where folks from this one town first congregated. And then from there, because of the saturation, so many people from this town were doing this and starting crews and driving, they became saturated. People began leaving and finding new markets. So first San Diego, then Pomona, Ontario, which is just east of LA, about 50 miles, then Portland, then Reno, Hawaii, and Seattle was another town within that became part of this kind of network of Western towns, the cities that these guys worked in. Their system was enormously potent and very hard to eradicate. The cops could arrest these guys all the time, but there would be new guys coming up and replacing them constantly. It had a variety of advantages. One advantage, or one way that it really worked well, was because they did not use guns. There were no gunplay. There's no Bloods and Crips shooting it out for territory, no mass slaughters. It was quiet. These guys pretended as if they were kind of this, like the guys in front of your Home Depot. That's how they dress. They drive old cars, very law-abiding. They're not partying in the place where they live. They're really just all about being under the radar. It also was important because it allowed a lot of guys from this town. The name of the town is Jalisco, in the state of Nayarit in Mexico. It's on the Pacific coast. It's a small town, about 20,000 people. Guys from this town, they were butchers, they were bakers, they were sugarcane farm boys. They were not cartel killers. What they were really looking for was kind of a leg up in life, an opportunity. And this provided a much better opportunity, it seemed to a lot of them, than just simply coming to the United States and working as a landscaper or a construction worker or as a drywall hanger or something like that. This was a lot more money. Of course, the risk was higher, but there was a lot more money involved. And very importantly, it was clear that they could, if they wanted, start their own crew. So once you drive for 6, 8 months, maybe a year and a half, you can go out and start your own crew and even compete with the guys you used to work for. And there's no violence. These guys all know each other, but even though they're competing head to head in these towns. And so this allowed for huge numbers of guys from this town to kind of sign up for this system. And this system began to expand. First it was on the West Coast, but soon it moved through the Midwest, Denver, Salt Lake, and then across to the Mississippi River. It landed in Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, the Carolinas. Up to this point, I've counted these guys in 17 states from one small town the size of like about half of Seattle's downtown, basically, and geographically speaking. And there is really one of the main suppliers of heroin to the United States right now is this little town of Jalisco in the state of Nayarit. And that's kind of beginning that story, finding that story, which I first found really in Columbus, because I was wondering, all their dope was going all around that area. And I found stories of this one town, Huntington, West Virginia, where 12 people had died of overdoses in 6 months. And that struck me as weird. And from black tar heroin before this never went across the Mississippi River. It is only on the western side of the United States. And so the question was, why there? And I'm calling Columbus DEA. They told me, yeah, there's this system that these guys brought in about 10 years ago, and it's just, we arrest these guys all the time, but that they send up new people constantly as well, and it's very hard to eradicate. And that's when they said, and we think it's all from one small town. And I basically tracked it back to this one town. Indeed, it's a town, small town. I went down to it, filled with heroin traffickers. Everybody in town, all the young men, particularly of the certain generation between, say, if you were like about 16 to 18 years old or coming up in the early 90s, for the next generation of guys after that, almost everyone has come here to work and drive heroin around with their mouths full of little balloons full of heroin, looking like chipmunks. They keep it in their mouths so in the case the cops stop them, they have a big bottle of water right there. They begin chugging on the water as soon as they get lit up by the cops, and they just swallow the balloons. And they look, once the cop shows up at their window, they look like any normal guy driving an old Nissan Altima.
And do they hope to pass that through themselves later?
Yes, correct. The balloons don't corrode. They couple 3 days later, they can get all those balloons back. It's an amazing system that works and continues to work all across the country.
So you stumbled or found the situation in West Virginia? Were you just covering heroin issues across the U.S.?
No, I've been assigned to write about how Mexican drugs were trafficked within the United States. There was a team of reporters covering what the drug wars going on in Mexico. My job, being in L.A., speaking Spanish, et cetera, was to cover how Mexican drugs were trafficked across the United States. It was a really good idea because no one ever writes about that stuff. Only when there's like an indictment, do you really see any coverage of this kind of thing. So my idea was, let's find all the different ways that this is working. And that's how I stumbled on this one story. And then it consumed my life. The problem was that I realized this system played into a lot of things I'd already been writing about for many years up to that point. I've been writing about small towns. So in Mexico, when I was down in Mexico, I knew that what was common in Mexico is finding a town where everybody does the same job. The reason for that is because in Mexico there is not really access to education that would allow you to grow up poor and become, say, a mechanical engineer. And so you learn your life's work from people around you who can give you a leg into it, like construction. Your uncle's a construction worker, you learn to be a construction worker too. I've seen this over and over and over. My first book, I wrote a story about a town where everybody is a popsicle maker, and they've made popsicles, and they start little businesses all across Mexico. Thousands and thousands of these businesses. La Michoacana, the popsicle shops, very well known. If people go to Mexico, I'm sure they've seen them. That's one town. That's one small little town which now has an enormous concrete statue of a popsicle in front of it in honor of the popsicle. You can see this, by the way, at my website, which is samquinones.com. I've got pictures of that stuff up. I've seen towns where there's several, but one in particular I've been to, where every man in the town, literally every man, is a pimp. They all traffic girls, and it's a devious town, diabolical town, frankly. But other towns where people are construction workers or tortilla makers. I've seen this over and over. So when the DEA agent in Columbus told me that there was a bunch of guys from one small town, it seemed very plausible. And they all had this one system, and they all worked this system, and they knew how to work it real well. And I thought, yeah, I bet that's true. The problem was finding out. He thought the town was Tepic. Tepic is the capital city of the state of Nayarit. I didn't think that could be possible. This is not a system that grows out of some big capital city, 300,000 people. It's something that grows out of some tiny town. And in fact, that's exactly what it was. It was a town, very small, 20,000 plus some little villages all around it, maybe 1,000 to 1,500 people each or whatever. And so a lot of this story grew out of, I recognized it as possible because of a lot of the work I'd been doing in Mexico, writing about immigrant villages where everybody went to the United States. I went down to this town, and one thing struck me when I had been traveling around a bunch of immigrant villages. One thing you always see everywhere, it's part of the skyline of immigrant villages, is rebar sticking up out of the houses. And there's a real good reason for that. People go north, they make money, they're working in landscaping or restaurant work or whatever. They save their money, and a lot of what they do is they build houses back home, but they don't have enough to build the house all at once. So they add on every time they visit, every couple of years, they're adding on. They build a first story. They want to build a second story. In order to do that, though, the kind of like the promise is, I'm going to build this second story. That's what rebar signifies. When I get enough money, I'm adding the second story onto my house. Right? You see this everywhere in Mexico in immigrant villages. Very, very common. Every time you go to, there's like the rebar sticking out of like electrified hair kind of. And in Jalisco, Nayarit, I saw no rebar. No rebar. That's because guys were making enough money selling heroin to build their houses all at once. Not take 8, 10, 12, 15 years sometimes is what people take to build their houses. It didn't take that amount of time. They could build the houses after working here 6 months, let's say 9 months to a year is what it often took them. They didn't need to put that rebar up because they built the whole thing all at once. And so seeing that, it was kind of like this very vivid example of what heroin meant, both for economic progress, but also for your social standing. That was such a big deal, I thought. It was just remarkable. At a certain point, it became, in the social hierarchy of this town, if you had rebar sticking out of your house, it was looked as low class because all these other houses, there was no rebar. It looks kind of dumpy to have rebar sticking out of your house for 5 years or something like that. And so the only way to be kind of like with it and moving up socially was to go up and sell heroin, because that's the only thing that allowed you to build your house very quickly without the rebar sticking out of the roof.
So did you get a sense of how many people within that town had participates in this?
Hundreds, if not thousands. I mean, really, every boy who grew up in those years pretty much went, unless their family already owned a lot of land. That's different. That's the difference. If guys in dead-end jobs like butchers, bakers, construction workers, sugarcane farm boys, that kind of thing, all those guys went. I mean, a whole generation. They're still doing it. But a lot of times the kids who didn't go were the ones whose families had resources, had social standing, had land, and so they didn't really need to. But that was not the majority of the area. The county is fairly poor otherwise. Now, of course, heroin has helped change that. The social classes. What used to happen was a lot of these kids would grow into life watching their parents humiliated. Mom would go to the butcher and not have enough money and ask for credit, and the butcher would speak to her very sharply, and disrespectfully. And a lot of these kids grew up with that. I had a few people mention this kind of thing. The social classes this was a poor town, but even there, within the poor town, there was rigid social classes. The butcher looked down on the hillbilly farmers or what have you. With heroin, changed that. Heroin leveled the playing field, the social playing field, and now the mom could go into the store and the guy would not speak. Hey, hello, senora, how you doing? Welcome. Oh no, because he knew she was not going to be asking for credit. On the contrary, probably buying more than anybody else. So it had this way. Heroin had this way of like changing things back in this small town in Mexico in a real fundamental way, which is another part of it. There's another weird part to this. What kept kids going, because crucial to this system is that there's always labor to replace the folks that the cops arrest up here. If you know that you always are going to be able to find people, it doesn't matter. Your guys can be arrested up in Seattle or in Portland or in Charlotte or Indianapolis, and okay, we'll send some more guys. So in order to keep that. There's got to be a lot of really powerful forces at work to keep people continuing to raise their hand, say, I'll go, after numerous people have been arrested behind this. The houses are one thing, the class leveling is another. One thing I found also though, very strange but fascinating was that this system very early on was recognized as a system that can turn very cheap black tar heroin that costs very little to make. The poppies are grown in the mountains just above the town, maybe 6-8 hours above the town. The goo from that poppy is cooked in town into black tar heroin. They can make it pretty cheaply. This system was a way of turning these little doses of black tar heroin into massive stacks of Levi's 501 jeans. Now, particularly in those years when it was really getting going and spreading across the country and using a ton of labor, those were years when Levi's 501s were kind of like the gold standard of Mexican rural menswear. They were very well made, very expensive, and particularly when they're really new, they're nice and dark blue, they were viewed as like the thing. You had to, if you had that compared to the ratty, very cheap Mexican jeans were flimsy and felt poor. These were like the real deal. They were spectacular jeans. This system was especially effective at turning heroin into Levi's 501s because these guys would sell to addicts. Addicts are one thing, they are fantastic shoplifters. Once it became clear to both sides that the addict could steal Levi's 501s, and the junkies figured out that these guys prized Levi's 501s above almost anything, they began to seriously get into, they would steal these. They could clean out a JCPenney's or a Target very, very quickly. And so what ended up happening was these guys would make up lists. The dealers would make up lists. I've got a nephew who's like this size, wants green. This size, and they would come home. They would come home with all these Levi's 501s that the junkies had stolen from them and traded each pair for a dose of heroin, which is cheap. Was dirt cheap. It cost them maybe like $2 to make. They would sell it for maybe 10 or 15, but the junkies would trade straight across, pair of pants for one dose of heroin. And so these guys would come home with stacks in cars, trunkfuls of Levi's 501s and hand them out like Santa Claus. Gifts. People would talk for weeks ahead of time. Oh, Juanito's coming home. I can't wait. Oh, gifts. Oh, let's go. It's going to be so fun. We're going to kill a cow, blah, blah, blah. This kind of thing. And they became like Santa Claus. Once kids in town saw guys walking around town with brand new Levi's 501s Friday night, in the plaza, looking really good. Boom, everybody wanted to be a dealer. That was just part of the attraction. You could come away with beautiful Levi's 501 jeans selling heroin in this way if you did it the right way. And they became addicts for jeans. I mean, that was like their narcotic. They never did the dope, ever. But their narcotic was coming home the king. A lot of money, sprint it around, buy the beer for everybody, all your new friends, because you have a lot of cash. You're putting up the house. The house has an automatic garage door opener. Whoa, that's really different. And you've got those beautiful jeans. I mean, all that was like this recruiting poster for this system. So guys lined up to work in it. They could see the economic progress, but it was also coming home after working 6-9 months, driving balloons around in your mouth for, in Denver or Portland or Seattle or wherever, Charlotte. Coming home, you had this feeling like, that you were the king. And that was like a narcotic. That was a very tough for guys to get to not do anymore. You do it once, it's like, whoa, wow, I got to do that again. You spend your money till the money runs out, you go back.
So who were the people that they are selling this to? Who are the customers?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. As I got into this story, what I realized was I had backed into the story. I was covering the second half of the story, let's say. That the question was, why was it that a town developed this system and all that? That was one question. The other question was, how on earth was it that they had a market for their dope in West Virginia or in Southern Ohio or in Charlotte, North Carolina or in Indianapolis or in, places like Salt Lake or Boise? I had never associated in all my years as a reporter any of those places with any kind of heroin at all. So how is it that they were selling, And that brought me to the second, the other part of the story is really the first part of the story. As I say, I kind of backed into the story focusing on this town in Mexico. But when I got into it, I realized all of these guys had been able to have a huge business nowadays because of a revolution in medicine that took place in the United States, beginning in the 80s and really gaining strength in the 1990s, that said that we are a country in pain and we need to use opiate painkillers to treat it, that is now a legitimate way of treating all manner of pain. Opiate painkillers, these are pills a lot of people have heard of, Vicodin, Percocet, OxyContin, of course. These kinds of pills are legitimate ways now. We know that they're legitimate ways for treating pain because we know, which they didn't, but they said they did, we know that these pills are virtually non-addictive when used for treating pain. Now, these pills do have their use and they can be effective and depending on the patient, but what ended up happening was there was this kind of like fire hose of pills unleashed on the country where everybody got tons of pills. And it became enormously common to go through a surgery and not get 2 or 3 pills post-surgery, but get an entire bottle of 60 Vicodin. Happened to me when I got my appendix out. I had no idea what these pills were. I had no explanation of how to use them, anything. They was just given 60 Vicodin, take them home with you. They didn't know anything about me. Did I have an addiction in my past? Anything like that? No, they didn't care. They just give it. So it's this massive, what we began to see beginning really in the late 80s, early 90s, especially in the mid-1990s when OxyContin was released in 96, is this rising sea level all across the country of pills. Pills used for post-surgery, pills used for when you have your wisdom teeth out, when really all you probably really need is like an Aleve or something, Advil maybe, something like that. You get opiate painkillers now. You get, for chronic pain, forget about it. There's almost no attempt to treat chronic pain for many years in anything other than with anything other than opiate painkillers. And the doses keep rising, Oh, you're doing 150 milligrams? Okay, how about 200? 200 doesn't work? 225, 300, 500 sometimes. It's just, that would kill most street addicts. I mean, there's dose levels that are really high, but people's tolerance keep rising, and people and doctors are normally they would say if the dose keeps rising, then maybe it's not working. But the recourse here was to simply prescribe more because we know they're non-addictive. This was something that a lot of pain specialists who were very intent on seeing these pills used for a lot of good reasons, sincere reasons, convince themselves. There's really no evidence to suggest that these pills are non-addictive. They are non-addictive for some people, and some people have no problem with them. Other people, they're very much addictive, and we see the results of this all across the country now. But the effect was to essentially create an entire new generation of opiate addicts by the hundreds of thousands nationwide. And a lot of this starts first in the area of southern Ohio, eastern Kentucky, West Virginia. This would be in the mid to late 90s. That becomes really ground zero for what happens later. What you end up seeing is widespread addiction to these drugs. You also end up there seeing the invention of what we call pill mills, which are quack doctors, or sometimes well-meaning doctors who just simply have their scruples worn down by the relentlessness and insistence of their patients of demanding these pills. Gotta have more, gotta have more. And generally, these are clinics where the doctor prescribes pills without much or any diagnosis. There's no attempt to figure out what you have, and is there another approach that might work. The pill mill really found its exquisite kind of rancid expression in a town called Portsmouth, Ohio, which I deal with in Dreamland. I talk a lot about Dreamland, Portsmouth in that book. Portsmouth is was the pill mill capital of America. It had about a dozen in a town of about 20,000, about the same size as Jalisco, Nayarit. It had about 20,000 people, and it had a dozen of these pills, prescribing millions of pills. I mean, every year. It's just a huge quantity of pills. Portsmouth's story is very interesting. It was talk a lot about it in the book. It was a wonderful industrial giant of a town. Steel mills, shoe factories, a lot of things were produced for many, many decades in that town. It was a place where it had the first NFL night game back in the 20s. A team in that town later went on to become the Detroit Lions. It was a kind of an all-American town, chosen an all-American town, this kind of thing. It also had this beautiful, glorious, enormous swimming pool, the size of a football field. And life itself took place. It was like the swimming pool sustained life. You started life at 3 in the shallow end. By 7th grade, you're out in the middle end. By high school, and after that, you were diving off the diving board in the deep end. And the pool itself was enormous, but also the owner was one of the owners of the factory, one of these factories in town. He kept adding more land, and it seemed like there was always room for more people. It was a very egalitarian place because everyone looked the same in swim trunks, right? The plant owner and the fat line worker, they looked the same. Parents watched everyone's kids. You grew up in public. And parents had no problem telling other kids that weren't their own, hey, watch it, don't do that, or tell their parents, The name of this pool was Dreamland. That was the name of the pool. Deindustrialization takes grip there in the 80s. The steel mill leaves. The shoe factories are dying. A lot of other jobs leave. Main Street empties out. And in 1993, after about 15 years of this, a depopulation as well. Town basically collapses. Dreamland is closed and turned into literally a parking lot. It's a sad thing. It's like a Joni Mitchell song or something. It's like a gorgeous pool, beautiful memories, holding the town together, and people lost their virginity out in the grass of Dreamland. It truly happened. It was this beautiful thing. And now it's dead. When that happens, when the very sustenance of the town is taken away, when the jobs are gone, the people are gone, and this town plaza, the pool, is taken away, then opiates move in, and opiates make quick work of a town that is so fragmented. Walmart becomes the place where you meet people. You don't meet people at the pool anymore because no pool to have. The main street is closed. So Walmart becomes the town square in a sense, but a very superficial one. No one stops to talk really. Cops become the new parents. Everyone's kind of turned inward. And in that situation, opiates make fast work. An entire generation, just as an entire generation in Jalisco, Nayarit, became heroin dealers, an entire generation of Portsmouth, Ohio, become pill addicts. There's a OxyContin economy. So many pills blown at this town through these pill mills that people can pay for everything. They could pay for T-bone steaks, cable service with pills. You can ransom your boyfriend, which happened with pills. Drug addicts don't care about cash. They want the pills, pills, pills. And you can pay for everything. The pill mills are like the central banks of the pill mill economy. You can pay for everything. And crucial to this economy is Walmart, because you can steal everything. Again, junkies are terrific shoplifters. You can steal everything at Walmart. It's all no longer do you have this kind of rich ecosystem, economic ecosystem of people out there along Main Street selling shoes, and next shop is selling men's clothes and women's clothes after that. It's all under one roof, and so the junkies just descend on Walmart, and Walmart really becomes a way of sustaining this OxyContin economy. They didn't obviously promote it or anything like that, but you can steal almost anything you need to support your habit now, which is in the $150 to $200 range a day with pills out of Walmart, and that's what happens at the town. The town begins to kind of just collapse under the weight of this opiate revolution that we had in the United States. As a way of comparison, we almost used no opiate painkillers in the 70s, or it was a minuscule amount. Morphine was used for some patients, very few. Even dying cancer patients had trouble getting these pills, even though they were in excruciating pain and only had 3 months to live. People were terrified of addiction. So we went from that extreme to the point where now we use 98% of the world's hydrocodone supply. That's the drug in Vicodin. It's a synthetic opiate. And 83% of the world's oxycodone supply. I mean, it's a true revolution, very quiet revolution. One place you really feel the blow, the real crushing blow, is on towns like Portsmouth, Ohio, that were so vulnerable, made vulnerable by this withering kind of effect of deindustrialization, depopulation, and losing all that sustained it, So it's a kind of an American story. The more I got into it, it's like a grand American saga. It's not just about drug trafficking. It's about a whole lot of bigger issues than that.
So then do you feel that Portsmouth is the example then that the rest of the country is picking up? I mean, where this pain is coming from, it's emotional pain.
Exactly. And there's two things I would say. Yes, to both. One is that it's almost as if in this story, what you get into are bigger questions than simply drug addiction. You get into questions of how do we achieve happiness, and it starts in these areas in Portsmouth, but it really then moves, strangely, to areas of great wealth. I mean, most of the places that have been affected by this, I think a lot of places that have been affected by this are places that have done enormously well. They've been the winners since the mid-1990s economic run-ups that we've had occasionally, through the 90s, early parts of the 2000s. Charlotte is a perfect, Salt Lake, Indianapolis. These are places where people have done very well during those years. And it's interesting because it's the kids of the people who have done best. The middle and upper classes have done best are the ones who are turning to and getting addicted to drugs used, of all things, to numb pain. It's like you get into some very existential questions when that's the case. And I think it has a lot to do with our way of understanding how we achieve happiness. For a long time, I think, since the end of the Cold War, we've had this attitude like, great, no more communists to deal with, let's party. Let's consume, bigger cars, bigger houses, bigger everything. It doesn't lead to any more fulfillment in life. But we thought it did. The final frontier of that I don't know, heroin seems like the final frontier and all that. You know, I mean, if stuff will make you happy, you think stuff will make you happy, more stuff will make you more happy, you keep on that treadmill looking for happiness through stuff, well, what's the final frontier? A drug that will dope you up, that will kind of remove all pain, that will send you into a kind of a blissful, doped up euphoria, or a nodding out, you know, just a lack of discomfort. Complete lack of discomfort. It's this weird thing. Not much of a philosopher really, but as I got into the story, began to think like, damn, this is really what this story is about. It's about existential angst at having too much sometimes. Because again, this story the pills really start as a problem in the poorest white areas of the country, but spread to the wealthiest areas, white areas of the country. Again, this is something that affects only white people. I have not seen any addicts to pills or heroin, new addicts to pills or heroin, that were non-white. They're pretty much entirely white people. So again, you get into this question of like, what does this mean philosophically? What does this mean existentially about how to achieve happiness, you know? Now, so Portsmouth is the place where you first see that, and central southern Ohio. In fact, the reason I also focused on the Jalisco boys from Nayarit is they were the first ones to really figure this market out. 1998, a guy sets up the first Jalisco store, they call them stores, in Columbus, which is the center for a big area where the pills are really just then becoming serious. A heavy promotion of these pills by the companies that make them, particularly Purdue, that makes OxyContin. They promote OxyContin like it was over-the-counter medicine. They give away pens and hats and all this kind of stuff. They give away a CD to doctors, primarily promoting them to doctors to get them to prescribe, saying the CD is a swing in the right direction with OxyContin. It's a bunch of swing tunes, Woody Herman, Benny Goodman, Count Basie, just as a way of saying, hey, OxyContin, OxyContin. These guys come just as this is happening. In fact, one guy figures this out. He's attempted to trade a junkie in Wheeling, wants to trade pills, a bottle of these pills. He looks at them, never heard of OxyContin. What the heck is that? Never heard of it before. For heroin. Well, this is a junkie. He's a junkie. He's one of the few guys in this system that actually began using. He was actually a Mexican-American guy. It's a long story, but they have a conversation, and he realizes out of that conversation, damn, if I just follow the pills, there's a heroin market waiting to be had. And he connection with his buddies from Jalisco, they take full advantage of this, and they begin to spread out during those years that follow. So Portsmouth and towns like it are the ones that really are pummeled by this. And then the system, what happens there, you know, the collision of pills and heroin that happens in Columbus and surrounding regions, then is a story that spreads across the country. We're seeing it now all across the country, where we have pills first, pills are the gateway, through whatever means. It could be recreational, it could be from getting it actually prescribed for your specific problem. You become addicted to it. Both things happen. It is not virtually non-addictive. These drugs are not virtually non-addictive. That's nonsense. It does create severe addiction often, even when used properly. So you've got all of this taking place, and it's spreading across the country. However, the place I love to go for, like, you know, this is a kind of a downer story maybe, but the place I like to go for hope turned out to be Portsmouth, Ohio. Again, this is a town that has been beaten down by all kinds of problems. Forces beyond their control, economics, international economics, downsizing, you know, the global economy, and the relocation of jobs abroad, all this kind of stuff has pummeled this town. Then, of course, it's drugs and the drug marketing and, you know, heroin, all this kind of stuff. It's awful, and the whole generation addicted. But, so I went there looking for that story. That was the story I went to Portsmouth, and I had heard about it, and so I spent some time there. But as I got there, as I spent more time there, I began to realize there was another story that you had to dig out. You couldn't see it very easily, but it definitely was there. And that was the town was developing, was like a junkie that had hit rock bottom. And when junkie hits rock bottom, that is what they say is the time when it begins to recover. It looks awful, it looks bombed out, it looks abandoned, but within the town, there was developing a real resilience, a real self-reliance out of all this, that there was this culture of recovery that was beginning to happen. I found it first in this weird story. The last vestige of the shoe factories that used to be there was a shoelace manufacturer. At one point had been the largest shoelace manufacturer in America. This was many years ago. It had dwindled, but it had hung in there really well, in fact, even in beyond the glory days. It had hung in there really well and done very well. The problem was, in the last few years before this, the third generation of the family that owned the plant began to run it. And the third generation in industrialized or Rust Belt America is kind of a famous thing. The founder is the first generation. He's real aggressive, may not have a business education, but knows, works his butt off. The second generation goes to business school, learns kind of really smart ways of expanding the business. The third generation likes to play golf, right? That's what happened to this business. This business had basically had lots of clients, was doing really, really well, and they just the owners didn't pay enough attention to it, and so it slipped into bankruptcy. It was a crazy idea because it actually was doing pretty well. The town of Portsmouth had spent more than a generation giving up, saying, oh, well, there's nothing we could do about these jobs going elsewhere. They had almost accepted the idea proposed by University of Chicago economists and Wall Street financiers that these kinds of towns were useless. They were in the way. They were old hat. They were old school. They meant nothing. They were meaningless. These jobs are just preordained by some economic god to go to Malaysia or Mexico. And they believed that, and the town kind of accepted their own defeat and their own worthlessness. Its own worthlessness. Until this one last factory was about to close. And it was almost like the town kind of willed itself to get up off the mat, in a sense, And a bunch of guys from local business types, insurance salesman, a lawyer, a couple of contractors, pulled their money, hired the managers, not the owners, but the managers of the plant who really knew what they were doing, and pulled this shoelace manufacturer out of bankruptcy, and decided that they were not kind of going to let someone else determine their lives for them, their future for them, the town's future for it, It was a beautiful story, a bizarre story, because I've never been in a shoelace factory before in my life, but they did it. They saved it. And now that same shoelace factory is employing 90 people, up from 20 just before bankruptcy. It's also, crucially, exporting shoelaces to China and Mexico and Taiwan. I mean, it's this fabulous story, but it was part of a larger thing that was going on in the town, which was to say enough of other things determining our lives, our future, telling us how we can live. And as part of that, grew up a real recovery culture from heroin and from pills. They closed the pill mills. The state legislature in Ohio passed a pill mill law saying this is how these clinics have to be regulated, and anything that's not working this way is illegal. And in fact, they closed down. Towards the end, I think there were 8 or 10 still in existence. They closed them all down. So the pill fire hose was turned off. And all these people in town got this breathing room. Now, a lot of people switched to heroin, but because there just wasn't the rehab infrastructure necessary. You're talking about massive rehab infrastructure necessary to deal with this. But a lot of people did go into recovery from this. And it was a beautiful story of people kind of saying, I'm done with other things or people or forces dominating my life. And the town within, if you look beneath the surface in the town, what you'll find is a real recovery culture emerging to compete with the let's get high all the time culture that was part of Portsmouth, Ohio for so long, following the deindustrialization and the closing of this beautiful pool called Dreamland. So Portsmouth and areas like it kind of led us into this epidemic that is now nationwide, is now everywhere. It's in Alabama, it's in Vermont, it's in Tennessee. But it's also kind of showing us maybe a way out as well. And to me, it gets back into there's a lot going on in Portsmouth. They've expanded a counseling center, rehab center down there enormously. It's one of the largest employers in the town, employs a lot of recovering addicts. It's moved into a lot of the abandoned buildings that are in the town, which is why it's able to expand so easily. And that real estate might be a lot more expensive in other cities. But it's showing the folks an example of let's get back to that great American self-reliance that built the country, that is so beautiful a part of this country, and which I have to say, so many Mexicans, immigrants from all over the world, but Mexican immigrants I saw come here looking for. That's part of what the Jalisco boys in Nayarit are all about. I don't want to be working for, a butcher all my life I want to create my own destiny, determine my own future, shape my own life. And that's why they sell heroin, basically. I mean, it's weird to say, but it's true. And so places like Portsmouth, I think, are finding that within it again. I mean, it's always there. It's been part of the town's DNA since it was formed. We determine our own lives here. Thank you. University of Chicago, Wall Street financier, no need to tell us why our jobs need to go to Malaysia. We can do it. Now, there's a lot of problems. That town has a ton of problems. It's been going, the major issues facing it have been going back for 30, 40 years. And you go there and you think, wow, that's a bombed out looking town. But what I found in that town also was this feeling of like, let's not let this happen anymore to us. We are there's a core to the town that was really exciting to behold. It was like hardcore. It was a real American hardcore, and that I really loved. And it was there that I kind of found this, I think, beautiful ending to all of this. Like, well, let's look where it started and see what they figured out. Because they've been doing have this problem a long time. And they've also figured out what we need to do as a country. Get back to not just saying, oh yeah, doctor, okay, whatever you say. How about saying, doc, why should I take 60 of these pills? Why are you giving me 60? Well, let's be accountable for this. Let's question some stuff instead of just accepting what kind of authorities tell us is the truth.
So it sounds like Portsmouth literally pulled themselves up by their bootstraps.
It's a beautiful story that way. After losing so much that was so beautiful, this beautiful pool, this beautiful Main Street, this small town Americana that really was, a beautiful place. It was a fantastic place to grow up. You could feel wealthy even though you were working class, because there was all this stuff that was very cheap to do, and people did it in community. You played outside until 11 o'clock at night during the summer. Nobody does that anymore. Everyone's all turned in. But now, yeah, Portsmouth was the place that found the kind of this answer. And the beautiful thing about it, I think, is finding the answer. I'm not sure. There's a lot of things that are still problems in that town. But it's finding the answer through it, returning to its own kind of essential core, its own DNA, which is, we're going to do this ourselves. Thank you very much. We're gonna determine our own future. We're gonna be accountable. We're gonna be responsible. We're not gonna sit around and go, oh, woe is me. Oh, nothing we can do. Oh, forget it. Life's over. We're useless. We believe what the Wall Street financiers say about towns like ours.
So, got about 10 minutes left. So the people from Jalisco, why isn't their operation why isn't it a threat to the cartels?
The same reason they were slid under the radar of police in the United States for a long time, they also slid under the radar of the cartels down there for a long time. Because they're dealing, each crew is like an independent little business. Each crew is, sending up 3 or 4 kilos of heroin to supply their store in Columbus and the one in Denver and the one in Minneapolis. Okay, I mean, that's about what it takes. And so it's like, the cartels are dealing in truckloads of cocaine, truckloads of marijuana, big factories of meth. What do they care about 2-3 kilos? They were too small for the cartels to really care about, particularly Sinaloa cartel. Nayarit cartel, the Nayarit state of Nayarit is just south of the state of Sinaloa. Sinaloa is along the Pacific coast. They're both along the Pacific coast. Sinaloa is a very big state, very well known. Nayarit is kind of like an afterthought, both in Mexican politics, Mexican society. No one really thinks about it. No one writes stories about it. It's kind of forgotten. And so it's a small state. It's less than 1 million people, or maybe it's over 1 million people. It's just a forgotten place. And so it was that, they use that in their own advantage a little bit. And the cartels really just, or particularly the Sinaloa cartel, just didn't ever pay any attention to them. Now, the wars that took place, that have been taking place over the last 10 years or so or more, did something to change that. The war between the Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas in Sinaloa bled down into Nayarit, and there was lots of violence in 2010, 2011, very bloody years down there. And now I think things have changed. People have to pay a quota, protection fee, in that town to be trafficking in this stuff. I think to the Zetas. I think the Zetas finally took over that area. But it's not... they still are able to work it, and it's mainly it's because these guys work in small scale. They have figured out crucial to their business model is that they're the only they're not cartel. It's just a business model. Crucial to their business model is that they control supply. They take the goo, the opium goo, cook it into heroin. They transport it into the United States. And unlike any other Mexican drug trafficking organization that I'm aware of, they also sell it retail by the 10th of a gram. Most drug trafficking organizations from Mexico don't do all of that. I've never heard of one that does. Let's put it that way. They'll do part of it, one side or the other. Mostly it's just wholesaling because retail involves a lot of risk. But if you're using farm boys and butchers and bakers who are willing to raise their hand and say, I'll go, and be part of this system, and drive, heroin around Indianapolis or around Denver or Charlotte for 6-9 months, then they take the risk. And for a long time, part of the appeal was that this risk was not that great. You would be caught with a few balloons of heroin, they'd deport you. You'd use a different name. You were Carlos in Denver. You were Armando in Portland. You were Jose in Charlotte. No one really knew who you were. You get deported a lot. There was not severe consequences. Now that's been changing, and that's made the labor pool a little bit shrink a little bit down there. But because a lot of cops here in the United States are wise. Initially, these guys designed a system. These guys designed a system where they looked very, very small time, like small time hustlers. Street hustlers, and it took only a few astute cops in each area of the country where they landed to figure out that they were actually not. They were just the tip of a vast network of traffickers whose system was designed specifically to make them look like they were nobodies. Really, really, really important in all this. They are not Scarface. They are the anti-Scarface. They're like little ant-like. There's one guy described it that way. It's like tráfico de hormiguero. It's like ant traffic. Little bits and little pieces, and you don't see it. And that's far more successful than the guy with the gold teeth and the big AK-47s and the girls in bikinis and the big mansion and big piles of blow or whatever. Yeah, that model is completely defunct. These guys don't use guns. These guys, like the drug companies, use marketing, use branding. That, using the free market, is unregulated free market, I might add, is very potent. That's an impotent system that you've got there. And you can do a lot with that without guns, without any violence whatsoever, a lot more than you can with the guns. I mean, the guns they create public outrage. They create public attention. Cops want to know why you're shooting up our strip malls, the way the Colombians did and when they brought in cocaine in the early 1980s, or the Bloods and Crips did all over the country, mainly in LA, when they were shooting it out for territory and feuding over a variety of things. These guys figure out, violence is old school, man. That's like the gold gunslingers in the Wild West. We're about branding. We're about every time you buy a balloon of our heroin, just like what's in a can of Coke, can of Coca-Cola, what's in that balloon. It's like 10th of gram of pretty potent black tar heroin, and also that if you don't like it or for some reason that batch didn't turn out to be very good, you can call them and say, hey, that batch is no good. They'll give you a free one because there's all about customer service.
And was it because of the potency of this new black tar heroin that the spike in deaths occurred?
Yes, but it was mainly because the addicts in those towns weren't used to that potency. You can get used to any kind of potency of heroin. You if you do it slowly and gradually, you can work up to doing 500 milligrams of heroin, I guess, of a very potent heroin, I suppose. But your body has to be used to it. It's when that big surge of stuff that you're not used to. That's the problem. That's why so many people OD when they get out of jail. They go back to using what they were using before they got to jail, but now they've done 6 months in jail and their body is not used to that amount. And that's a big problem when people get out of jail. They start back using what they used to use. And it becomes that's when a lot of people die, and all across America I found that, Dreamland, I kind of recount a couple of those examples where people get out of they're just not used to the potency that they get. And in Huntington, West Virginia, that was definitely the case. People were not used to that. And the dope that they were bringing down. Remember, these guys are selling 60 to 80% pure heroin. Normally, heroin is sold and resold again 5-6 times. Each time it's diluted, it's stepped on. But these guys never stepped on their dope or do it very little. And so they get some very potent stuff because that's the way they compete. They don't shoot each other. They compete on customer service, price, and quality. And so if that's one of the ways you compete. You're never going to really cut it too much. You might cut it a little bit, but because you don't want people to die, that would be a response to people dying. But mainly they see this as just customer service, and so they're all about bringing it as quickly and as potently as they can across.
And are these franchises still in business today?
Oh, all over. Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think they're still in of course, this is the underworld. It's change, it shifts all the time. And what I write today in Dreamland might be a year from now, now they're in Oklahoma, or, they're Boston, they could be there, It changes a lot. They may have taken their stuff out of Indianapolis finally. I don't know. It shifts constantly. It's a very fluid situation. But definitely that's a big part of of our heroin economy today is the Jalisco boys from Jalisco, Nayarit. It's an amazing story of one tiny town. It just blows my mind that one tiny town could be that important in our heroin thing. But of course, in a day when pill addicts are being created by the marketing of pills constantly and the relentless prescribing of pills, their business, may be going on for quite some time.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Been talking with Sam Quinones. He is author of the new book, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. And you have a website as well?
It's samquinones.com, and there I have my email, and I'm happy to hear from anybody who wants to chat.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for spending time with us today.
No, my pleasure, mate. Thank you.